To V or not to V? That is the question. No, it's not. It's not. It just isn't. It's how to V. Hello fellow CNC nuts, and welcome. Today I'm going to show you the jig I use to put the V on my V-rails. Now for my V-rails I'm using angle iron, 1 inch by 1 inch, or 25 mils by 25 mils, whichever floats your boat. So why do I use steel instead of angle aluminium? Well, aluminium is far too soft. It will not take the weight of a machine of this size and weight. The V-rails, if they're made out of aluminium, will deform very quickly. I'll be changing the rails every other week. Even the steel rails on this machine have deformed over time. You can see where they're worn. You can feel, when you feel down the sides of them, a lip that's been formed as the steel has been pushed down to the sides. So aluminium is out of the question for this. You have to use steel. And I like to put a nice V on them as a starting point for the machine to run on. And it's really easy to do. The jig I made is out of some scrap MDF I had laying about, an old grindstone I've got, and I used my drill press. Now the drill press you use, if you're going to use this method, needs to be a pretty reasonable one. Drill presses generally aren't made to take side forces as I'm going to be putting on mine. But I've been using this for 8 years to make V-rails, and all the V-rails I've made for this machine, and I've made a few more than it's actually shown here, have all been done on the drill press, and it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with me drill press after all this time. But if you don't feel comfortable using yours, not a problem. There are other methods that you can use. On the MechMate forum they actually made a skate to run along the V-rail, the angle iron rail I should say, that allows it to put a V on top of it. But I came up with this method and it works well for me. Without further ado, let's have a look at it. So this is my rail grinding jig. I designed it 8 years ago when I ground the original rails for my machine. It's very simply made. It's nothing more than 2 pieces of MDF 3/4 inch thick with a V cut into it. The V is 90 degrees. This little upstand here I added later for a different job. So if you're grinding rails like I am, you don't need it. I added this little slot in here, which I made using a drill and a chisel, so that if I'm using a grindstone like this and it's got a screw in the bottom, it could actually fit into that slot and the stone can get as low as possible. The jig is teamed up with something like this. It's a little grindstone. It's got a little arbor in it and just fits into the drill press. I just brought this here for a couple of dollars. I saw it downtown one day and thought I'll grab that, it'll be useful for something. So something like this is ideal. Likewise, if you can't get one of these, then you can go for something like this. This is a 4-inch wheel from an angle grinder. I made a small arbor similar to this on the lathe, and I can now attach a range of angle grinder wheels, cutting wheels, and flap discs to my drill press, which is quite handy at times. In this case I'm going to use the small grinding wheel. For demonstration purposes I'm going to use this original rail off my machine to show how the process works. This one I removed from the X-axis quite a few years ago, and you can see at the top is all the V's have actually rusted up quite a bit. So I'm going to see if I can bring them back to life. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down the grindstone until it just sits on the rail here. Normally, of course, you wouldn't have a V here, but that makes no difference. My drill press has an adjustment nut here that allows me to set depth of cut, and I'm going to use that as a reference for this. With the stone brought down to the V-rail, I'll just check to make sure that the bolt that attaches the grindstone to the arbor here is in the slot here, just in case it's going to end up rubbing on my platform here. Next, I'm going to take some clamps, and I'm just going to clamp the jig into place. We're now ready to grind one side of the rail, and it really is a very simple process. Simply drop the stone down, lock it in place, and then carefully feed the rail through under the stone. Now, one of the things you need to do with this is you need to make sure you set the drill press speed as slow as possible. In my case, it's 280 RPM. Don't run it fast. By running it slowly, it will cut really well and it will not provide a great shower of sparks. That means the rail will stay cool while you're machining it, and you'll be able to hold on to it easily. Running this fast gives a better finish without doubt, but everything heats up. This here will get so hot you won't be able to hold it. You'll have sparks going everywhere. So run it slowly and it will cut very quickly and efficiently. It's really surprising how quickly it can cut through the steel. Now, as with any job, safety is important, but in this particular case we're grinding steel, and the last thing I want is steel in my eyes. So safety glasses, ear muffs because it will be noisy, and leather gloves as well. Now, the stone will be rotating in this direction here, and I'm not going to go against the direction of cutting in this case. I'm going to go with it. It'll make it a bit easier, but you need to make sure you hold on to it. It's very unlikely to be picked up and thrown through the jig here, but do hold on to it anyway. Now, I'm just going to feed it in like so, and it will start cutting. Don't worry too much if the end gets a little bit ground away more than you expect. That's perfectly fine, because when you're doing a rail like this here, what you do is you make sure the rail is longer than you need, so it doesn't matter if the very ends get damaged. This is set to take a very light cut. Now that barely skimmed it. I can see that there's some shiny bits on there, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn that nut 1/6 of a turn, drop the stone back down and run it through again. Okay, well that's looking good now. I can see that it's been uniformly gone over its length here. Now, I'm not worried about the finish on this at this time. I will come back later and we'll polish that up. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this edge here. Now, the original jig didn't used to have this piece on it, and it was designed to come apart. This piece here would be unscrewed and could be turned over to make a slot at 45 degrees like this. That then allowed the angle iron to slide into place like so, and then it could be dragged across the stone. That way the angle iron would be firmly held in place, it couldn't move while it was being moved past the grindstone. And that's still a great way of doing it. I've come up with another method that's slightly easier and doesn't require the modification of the jig. Now turn the rail around and put it into the jig this way here. So we're putting the back face here against this edge, and we're presenting the newly ground edge towards us. Now the first thing I need to do is I'm going to need to relocate the jig. I'm going to bring my bolt down here so that I've got a correct height, and now I'm going to add these two blocks of plywood, one here and one here. I've put them lightly up against the rail and I'm just securing them with some clamps. Now the idea of the blocks is to stop the rail rotating towards me any further than it should. That means I can push it through and it should just move smoothly through without having to worry about it rotating. That means I just need to keep a bit of pressure on it to stop it jumping out like so. I'll now drop the wheel and we'll run it through. I'll now drop it down a little bit more and run it through again. And there we go, it's ground this surface as well. It doesn't take very long working from scratch. This method will very aggressively cut this rail very quickly to give you your V's. So next we're going to put a polish, or at least improve the finish on these rails. And to do that I'm going to increase the speed of the drill press. And I'm going to run this up to 1275, that's 1275 RPM. When I do that, I'm going to run it through again, and this time the rail will get warm or quite hot when I do that. I'm just going to clean any of the grit out from the V-groove here so that the rail will move smoothly through it. Now I'm not going to adjust the height of this wheel at the moment. I'm just going to run it through again just at the quickest speed. Now that's only made a small difference, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the stone down just a fraction more and run it through again. Now the more observant of you will have noticed there were sparks coming off at this time, but I've got a much nicer finish on the rail. The rail is also considerably hotter than it was when I did the slower passes. You can see on here the swarf that's left from the grinding process. I'll now put it back on and look at doing the other side of the rail. Okay, well that looks pretty good. That's nice and smooth, and you'll notice this time I didn't get that shower of sparks coming off it. That's because I wasn't quite as aggressive. I took it down in even finer increments, and that's really the secret. You really want to try and avoid those sparks coming off it, because this means you're just grinding too much material away. Now something you're going to get is little burrs like this here on the very edge, so you need to get a file and just run it down the edge and remove these just to smooth them off, both the inside and the outside. Because the top of the rail has got a point on it now, I'm going to go and run it through the stone. I've put a wee fence here that I'm going to run the angle iron past, and it's turning this way here, and this time I'm going to be pushing against the direction of it turning. If I try and go with it, it'll just take this thing out of my hand. So this time I'm going to go against the direction. So that's given me a nice flat on top. It's about just under a millimetre, maybe say 30 thou, something like that. Just a wee flat. You don't want a big point up there. It doesn't need to be. So here's the finished rail. The V-bearing runs very nicely along the rail. When I sight between the sides of the V-bearing and the angles on the rail, I can't see any light coming through them, so these here must be at 90 degrees. It looks to be centered on the rail, which is good, and that's really all there is to it. Now of course I started with a partially ground rail. It was virtually complete, but the process is exactly the same. Just take it easy, bring the stone down in small increments, and you'll very quickly get these V's on it. Within a few passes you can very quickly grind it away. Make sure you're running the grinding wheel at a slow speed, otherwise you've got that shower of sparks and a lot of heat build up. It's no good for the stone, it's no good for the steel, it's no good for you. It's just going to make a mess. If you can get an arbor that will fit an angle grinder stone, then even better. These are really good, really aggressive, and work really well. Again, same process, run it slowly, and you'll get really good results. Once you got most of it ground away, then move to a finer stone and run it that bit faster so you can get a better finish on it. But even so, don't even worry about it if you can't get a good finish on it, because running those V-bearings up and down these rails will soon smooth them out quite well. Now for anyone wanting to do a dual rail, that's what this back support here is for. If we take a piece of C-section steel, now this is really solid stuff. It can sit in the V here, and the back of it rests against the support here. Now I can put a V on the top here and a V down the bottom here. I can then rotate take the rail out, turn it over, put it back in, and repeat the process. V on this side, V on the inside here, and that's all sides done. It works really well for this type of steel channel. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. If you're looking for a method to grind your own V-rails, this should give you at least one idea to give a try. There's still a bit more work to do on the V-rails. They've got to be painted and have holes drilled in them, and then of course put onto the machine, but we'll save that for another episode. In the meantime, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Cheers!